As armed groups began enforcing the school boycott and Cameroonian military forces moved into the region to crush any armed resistance.
This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. This is a show where we try to talk about stuff you haven't heard about already. News that feels new, you know? And so we're starting tonight by shedding a little light on some overlooked crises around the world. Fortunately for us, the Norwegian Refugee Council has an annual list of the world's most neglected displacement crises. They gauge this by looking at three things: lack of international political will, lack of media attention, and lack of economic support. So let's catch you up real quick on a few crises that get way too little global attention. According to the NRC, Ethiopia is undoubtedly home to one of the most neglected global crises after a conflict in the Western African nation's northern Tigray region exploded last November and exacerbated an already dire humanitarian situation. The country is already home to hundreds of thousands of refugees from neighboring countries, and the fighting with Tigray created thousands of internally displaced people who were fleeing the fighting. There's a possibility things may change in the near future though. While the situation has a long way to go, the recent announcement of a unilateral ceasefire from the Ethiopian government may create some space for international aid workers to do their jobs. The United Nations has since appealed to all the parties involved to allow quicker access to aid for those in need in the region. Venezuela, just a bit further south of us, is also on the NRC's list and has been for the past 5 years. Despite being what the UN says is one of the largest displacement crises in the world, only 39% of the aid appeal for Venezuela's crisis has been funded. While COVID-19 made it harder for people to leave for other countries in 2020, the situation within Venezuela has become worse, with 1 in 3 Venezuelans being food insecure and an overtaxed health system. With an average of 6,000 people displaced from their homes every day and declared a mega crisis by NRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo tops the list for most overlooked displacement crises in 2020. The end of 2020 saw 20 million people reliant on aid versus 13 million from 2019, and aid money from the international community has been sorely lacking. Things are only getting worse in 2021, with more than 23 million people suffering from acute hunger, the highest number of people in the world. Now, just above the DRC on the list of the nations with the world's most overlooked crises is another African nation, Cameroon. A pretty unique regional crisis there over language has put schools and children in the crosshairs, with rebels applying not just political pressure, but also some very real violence to enforce a strict boycott of businesses and education. For our award-winning Newsy Bellingcat series, our own Jake Godin took a deep dive into Cameroon's crisis, working with human rights watchdogs and talking to leading figures on both sides of the conflict. Here's our latest visual investigation.
This is the aftermath of one of the worst massacres in an ongoing conflict between the Anglophone minority and Francophone-dominated government in Cameroon. A bilingual academy attacked by unknown assailants, killing 7 children and injuring a dozen more. But it's not the only such attack. Children, teachers, and school buildings have been targeted by separatists and by the Cameroonian government. Newsy and Bellingcat, working with human rights monitors, used open-source material and interviews with both sources on the ground and in the diaspora to investigate attacks against not only the region's school system, but an entire generation of Cameroonian children. Cameroon can be divided into 2 distinct areas: the French-speaking or Francophone region in the east and the English-speaking or Anglophone region in the west. While both are supposed to have equal status under the nation's constitution, the Francophones have dominated Cameroon's political landscape since the country gained independence 60 years ago. In 2016, Anglophone lawyers, students, and teachers in the western part took to the streets to protest their lack of representation in Francophone-dominated courts and schools.
Because the government wants to change the way of education. All the things are going on in the Francophone way.
It's time that Anglophones stand up and fight for what belongs to them.
No violence! No violence! Protests escalated in 2017 when Anglophone separatist groups unilaterally declared independence. In addition to violently clashing with the Cameroonian military, these separatists have imposed weekly ghost town days, boycotting schools and businesses in hopes of pressuring the Cameroonian government to come to the negotiating table.
If there is a meaningful blanket boycott, not attacking schools, not burning down schools, a blanket boycott where every school is actually shut down, it will compel the state to come to the table as soon as possible.
As armed groups began enforcing the school boycott and Cameroonian military forces moved into the region to crush any armed resistance, schools found themselves caught in the middle, and it became increasingly dangerous for children and teachers to attend school, especially in rural areas. As of 2019, the Global Education Cluster said that 4 out of every 5 schools in the Anglophone region was closed due to the conflict. Working with our partners at Bellingcat and using satellite imagery and social media posts, Newsy has been able to geolocate numerous incidents targeting schools or students and teachers throughout Cameroon's Anglophone regions. These include schools being lit ablaze, armed raids and kidnappings, and the Kumba massacre, where 7 children were killed. Some of this was perpetrated by the Cameroonian government, some of it by various separatist groups. A conflict like this, one of the most underreported in the world, is rife with disinformation. But with open source reporting, we can verify where and when these events took place. In many instances we examined, the affiliation of the group responsible for a school burning is difficult to determine.
Jesus Christ.
This was the case for a school burning in 2020, where students and teachers were forced by unidentified assailants to strip and flee the campus. However, we were able to confirm the location, Kulu Memorial College in southwest Cameroon, near the city of Limbe. In other instances, we can determine the likely affiliation of the group in the video, but not exactly whether they're responsible for the burning. This 2019 video was shot in a small town called Eka. In it, you can see men in military uniforms resembling those of Cameroon's government standing in front of a burning school. Pro-government media claims separatists were storing arms in the school. Beyond the arson attacks, children and teachers violating the school boycott imposed by separatists risk being kidnapped or threatened by armed groups. In 2018, 79 students were kidnapped from the Presbyterian Secondary School in Newquin, this location here. They were released 3 days later. According to the students, the goal was to intimidate them so they would no longer attend school. A teacher who is currently out of work because of the boycott told us that he has to walk a thin line between separatists enforcing the boycott and government troops. For his protection, we're not using his voice.
The first problem we are facing is with the Amba boys. Anybody who attempts to go to school, a government school, that person is in trouble. The second thing is that even the government forces themselves, they target us.
On top of that, there are also criminal groups with no clear affiliation who we've been told have taken advantage of the situation to extort teachers and students. The boycott on government-run schools being enforced by English-speaking separatists started out as an attempt to bring the government to the negotiating table, but has dragged on and, in some cases, created a dangerous environment for both teachers and students.
Perhaps at the time school boycott was good, but school boycott cannot run for long, and you cannot sacrifice the well-being of kids for political reasons.
Barrister Felix Agbor Nkongho is the founder and president of the Center for Human Rights and Democracy in Africa. He led peaceful protests early on in the conflict, before he was arrested and imprisoned for 8 months by the Cameroonian government.
So we are perpetuating a vicious cycle of poverty, of underprivilegedness in such a way that the kids who cannot afford an education, because their parents did not afford an education, they'll end up being the lowest of the society.
For those children who cannot go to school because they've given us an educational system that is a liability, fight for your country.
Cho Ayaba is the leader of one of the 2 main separatist political bodies, the Ambazonia Governing Council. He's also the leader of its military wing. He told us that kids could go to school, but only if it was in territory under their control.
We are defending our independence. And I don't think you would want a foreign curriculum of education to be imposed within your own country. The enemy must withdraw from our country and let us set up our own institutions to oversee our educational system.
The boycott has forced many students to choose between an education or the threat of violence if their school is targeted by any of the myriad groups wanting to uphold the boycott.
We know basically that there would be a lapse. This generation is paying a price for the next generation to have, a better future. That's what has happened in every country that has fought for their freedom.
There's still a long way to go in ensuring a safe education for Cameroon's children, especially with attacks like the Kumba massacre still threatening students. The mere threat that something might happen sent these children in Limbe fleeing from schools last year, shortly after the massacre took place.
Actually restoring the system to the levels of schooling they had before the crisis is going to take a lot more time. Some of the areas are insecure and have been abandoned for like 3, 4, 5 years, and it's difficult without massive investment to get schools there going again.
Now, this crisis in Cameroon has created a lot of refugees, but those are refugees within Cameroon's own borders. So rather than calling these people refugees, they're technically internally displaced persons. That's what the United Nations and many human rights groups call people who've had homes or jobs destroyed and had their lives overturned by conflict or some other crisis. As of 2020, there are more than 45 million internally displaced persons worldwide. Just imagine that for a moment. Being displaced in the same place you call home. And while refugees face plenty of challenges, people displaced within their own home countries definitely have their own unique hurdles to navigate. As the UN puts it, those people internally displaced stay within their home countries and under the protection of the government there, even when that government might be the reason for their displacement. A hostile home government might make it even tougher for human rights groups to reach these internally displaced persons than it is to reach refugees in other countries. Understandably, it can be difficult to get exact figures on how many internally displaced persons a nation might have. But in Cameroon, the best estimates say about 1.3 million people are displaced within their own home country, while at least another 400,000 refugees from Nigeria and the Central African Republic have fled to Cameroon. The good news is that those unique needs of internally displaced persons are starting to come into clearer view and be met with more unique efforts from groups, including the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. The Biden administration is planning to make moves to relocate Afghan interpreters who've helped US troops, but some Afghans are running into major hurdles.